Welcome back to Unirunner Video Drum Lessons for November 2nd, 2006. I'm your host Darren Mathis, and today we have the opportunity to hear from Mike Dresch from Cathouse Studios in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Mike will share with us his insight into drum miking and drum sounds that he's gained from working with an amazing number of musicians over the years at Cathouse Studios. He has a reputation for not only having an excellent ear, but also being an excellent individual to work with. I'll post a link for the Cathouse Studios website at unirunner.com under the listing for this podcast. Without further ado, our discussion with Mike Dresch. Well, thanks, Mike, for having us in Cathouse Studios today. Now, this is a new studio, or you've been here about a year, you said?
We've been here about a year. We were operating out of another place for about 5 years previous to that.
Was curious as to when new drummers come in or bands come in, do you have a set way of miking the drums, or what's your approach when a band first comes into miking drums?
Well, miking drums can really depend on the drum set itself. A lot of younger rock bands I have will bring in a 4-piece kit, and historically the drum sound when you're miking up a kit usually starts from the overheads. So the size of the kit depends on how I'm going to mic it up the overheads. If I have a real small kit, I might go with an XY pattern, where your mics are kind of like this, with one pointing this way and one pointing the other way. It's kind of like your X or your Y. If it's a real large kit, I'm going to have to spread my overheads a little wider, because an XY pattern probably isn't going to catch all the cymbals and maybe all the toms and stuff. So I may go with more of an outside miking technique with the overheads pointing down towards the snare. And I've actually experimented with some other miking techniques as well when they want certain drum sounds. Like they'll bring in a reference CD and say, I want my drums to sound like this. So you have to kind of experiment sometimes.
What's the minimal number of mics that you would recommend going with, or that you typically go with?
Well, that I typically go with, I usually like to have flexibility, so I will usually put at least one dynamic mic on each of the toms, and then a dynamic on top of the snare, and sometimes on the bottom of the snare to catch some of the snare strand sound. And then 2 overheads, a hat mic, and even sometimes a ride cymbal mic when I want to get more ride to come out of the mix.
So what are some of the differences between miking drums in the studio as opposed to for a live gig in front of an audience?
Live, you typically don't have to use near as many mics as you do in the studio. I mean, miking technique-wise, it's usually pretty similar. But live, you have to worry about the lead-through from all the other instruments. So where you position the mic is much more critical. Usually your manufacturer of your microphone will include in your literature the actual microphone pattern and where it actually rejects from behind the mic. Like some mics will reject directly behind, some reject more from the sides, so you have to be really aware of that when you're miking live. Say if you have like your bass players right next to your drum set or your guitar players right next to your drum set, you have to kind of angle it away a little bit.
All right, here we are inside. What do you call this room, Mike?
This is kind of our main live room where we do most of our drum tracking or guitar instrument tracking.
You're going to show us how to mic a tom now.
Yep. All right, first thing, this is a basic standard dynamic microphone. It's called the Shure SM57. First, the way I start with these, I'll put it directly over the tom, and usually what I'm aiming for is right where the drummer strikes the head. Typically, I've found when you put it, like say over the drum, I've seen people mic it like this and like this, but my best results have always kind of come from when I get it aiming right where the actual sound is being produced from where the drummer's hitting the head.
So now when it comes to kick drum playing, I know some people will have a hole in their kick drum, some people won't. So how do you deal with that?
A lot of times I record rock music primarily, so usually I'll try and get them to use a head with a hole in it, because rock you usually want that attack, that punchy attack, and really the only way you're going to get it is if you get a microphone inside the kick drum.
Okay.
If they're going for that kind of classic rock feel, we can usually make it work without the hole in it, maybe using a standard dynamic and maybe a condenser on the outside of the kick drum to get more of that natural round tone. But for the attack and punch of rock or metal, you got to have something inside. You got a microphone inside the drum. Here's just a good basic drum miking placement. This kind of placement will give you a nice round warm tone when you have a hole in the drum head. Basically, it's just the microphone right inside the hole. It really kind of depends where you cut the hole in your head, what kind of tone you're going to get. If you cut it in the middle, you're going to get a little bit more push from the kick drum, just basically because you got the air coming right out the middle of the drum head. Here it's going to give you a little bit more round tone, maybe not quite as much attack as you would get in the middle of it.
So when groups come into the studio, Mike, are drummers or bands looking for a particular drum sound that's really popular these days?
Well, a lot of it seems to be either that real tight piccolo type snare sound, or just
like a 311 type of...
Well, that and that are like a real big type of crack to the snare drum, you know. Usually it involves really tightening the snare head down quite a bit. I mean, no one seems to want that real, you know, loose, sandy sounding kind of 80s snare, thank heavens. I guess.
So what are some of the bands now that drummers are trying to emulate as far as their sound?
Well, I mean, talking about hard rock and things like that, you know, the big one was Blink-182 was pretty big, you know. Travis Barker was a big influence for a lot of those pop punk kids. A lot of metal kids nowadays, like say bands like Lamb of God, really got that real tight snare drum and really punchy, clicky kick, that kind of thing.
So when you process that drum sound in your mixing stage, what are some of the effects that you'll typically go with, or will you base it a lot on what they brought in as far as a demo CD or an example for?
Yeah, I try and get, you know, if they're going for a real particular sound, it's really helpful to have a reference CD of the type of tones they're looking for. If they leave it up to me, things I'm going to run, you know, obviously EQ, compression, sometimes limiting on different drums. Sometimes I may compress the whole drum mix, you know, just to get that overall compressed tone. A lot of music nowadays is heavily compressed, unlike, say, the 70s and 80s where it was a little more dynamic. Nowadays, everybody wants everything as loud as it can be all the time. So that
pushing the levels,
yeah,
pushing the limits.
A lot of compression, a lot of limiting, and you just have to kind of tweak it based on the drummer's technique more than anything. Some drummers have a real consistent technique. Some are a little more dynamic, where they, you know, do ghost strokes or you know, hitting it full on, and everything in between. So you have to be able to adapt. You know, sometimes the tones they want, they aren't really physically set up to play, so you know, you got to kind of
work within the limit of the drum.
Yep.
Or the... Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
I want to thank Mike for taking the time to share with us all that great stuff. I really enjoyed my visit to Cathouse Studios, and I encourage you as well, if you're in the Sioux Falls, South Dakota area, to check it out. Again, I'll post a link to Cathouse Studios' website at unirunner.com. I mentioned this last week. Podtrac is currently surveying Unirunner podcast listeners to learn more about you. If you have a few minutes, I invite you to visit unirunner.com and click on the link to take the survey. It's at the top of the page on the home page. If you do that, just email me what appears on the screen after the last question of the survey, and I'll enter you into a contest for 2 DVD sets and 4 pairs of drumsticks. It's a Steve Smith DVD and a John Blackwell DVD. And that contest will be going until the end of December, when I'll draw a name at random. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep practicing, and God bless.